Monsieur Anber.
Monsieur Savannah. How are you, brother?
I can't complain. Another evening here on the Calling Russ Anber podcast. Thank you for everybody for tuning in as you're enjoying your cup of tea. And for those of you who want to hear about Sugar Ray Robinson, who Russ has a t-shirt of, and also a little bit more about boxing history and some great books, we had a guest on also this week by the name of Carl Frampton from Hamilcar Publications, who will be coming out and have come out with a bunch of good, interesting, fascinating reads. So please be checking that out on YouTube as well, our interview with Carl. But for now, we'll be continuing with some quick hit subjects for this week. We'll get to the Carl Frampton retirement announcement after his knockout loss to Jamel Herring over the weekend. But Mr. Anber, any thoughts this evening here as you?
It was great speaking with Kyle, and the way it came to be that we form a friendship and an association, and it all comes back to what I said earlier. That when you have people who share a passion for something, it's easy to become friends. And there's different ways of sharing that passion. We do it through my, working corners and being around fighters and being at the fights and making equipment. And he does it by being around writers who want to write about fighters because he loves boxing. And the stuff that he has are really works of art. And I'm proud that we're associated with him and carrying those books and selling them because they really are worthy. They're worthy of being Rival and part of Rival. And I'm proud to sell the books for Kyle and his associate Andy. They're just real. They love boxing and the books are beautiful. So I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, you can check out the books on rivalboxing.com is what, the website you're referring to. You can also be sure to check out the podcast and the interview on our YouTube page if you like. We're going to talk about the Joe Smith fight, title opportunity for him here in a matter of moments. But before we do, there's a lot of action this weekend, and we'll get to many of the bouts that are upcoming. And if you're interested in placing a wager or two on some of these results, because there's an interesting matchups for sure on paper, be sure to check out bet99.com. They're Canada's newest online sportsbook and casino. And Mr. Anber, you know what you can check out while you're there?
The double bet.
Here's the actual things you can't check out: the player props, bet builder, risk-free live bet bonuses, and if you use the code boxing99, you get a sports welcome offer. You know what that is, Russ?
Yes, the sports welcome offer. They'll match your bet, right?
Of 100%. It's basically deposit match
up to $600.
That's right. So deposit match of 100% up to $600 if you use the code boxing99. So one of those big bouts this weekend is Joe Smith and Maxim Vlasov that got delayed because Vlasov had COVID a few weeks ago. Now Joe Smith gets the vacant title opportunity and a title shot, a tough, rugged light heavyweight. And when you look at some of the best light heavyweights in boxing right now, Joe Smith, even without the title, probably ranks in the top 5. He is in most people's rankings. When you look at Arthur Beterviev, Dmitry Bivol, maybe Badu Jack, Jean Pascal, Gilbert Ramirez, Sergey Kovalev, but Joe Smith is in that equation. And Russ, you having been in the opposite corner of a Joe Smith fight not that long ago until later Alvarez, what are your impressions of the matchup for Smith versus Vlasov this upcoming Saturday night?
There's two guys in the light heavyweight division who I think define the grit and determination of wanting to succeed and perhaps even overachieving for the God-given talent that they have. Joe Smith is one and Callum Johnson is the other. Rugged guys who can punch, who come to fight. They understand that there's a science to boxing and they've crafted their trade around it. Okay, hands up, do that. But at the end of the day, it's from what's in here and the grit and desire in their heart and balls that make them fight, that make them so dangerous. And Joe Smith is one of those guys. I don't care who you would have put him against, when you would have put him against. You would probably only be able to name, if at best, a handful of fighters who would have had a relatively easy time with a Joe Smith. Maybe Roy Jones might be one of them. Andre Ward even Ward, because he wasn't that big of a puncher. You'd have been in a rough night. Even if you won every round, you're in a rough night with Joe Smith. And you
Just
know
ask
what?
Russ, the fighter that you have a picture of behind you, poster of, who will be the ultimate trivia question as to who was his opponent for his last career fight. And
Yep, and I was there for that fight. I was there, and you know, questioned early. We fought on an undercard fight. I think it was the semi-main event. It might have been the semi-main event with Alexander Usyk, where he fought on the undercard. And I remember getting up on the ring apron, and I said, you know, my feet were balanced on an apron that was this wide, and the ropes were really loose. And I said to Usyk, go test the ropes out, feel the ropes, you know, so you get used to them, because they were really sagging and loose. And sure enough, as a result of that, Hopkins you know, he leans on the ropes from another attack from Joe Smith, who was putting relentless pressure on him. And he kind of leaned on the ropes, and basically the ropes just gave way. They weren't strong enough to hold a 175-pound man, and he slipped right through them and came crashing down, you know, from up over 3 feet flat onto the concrete floor. So lucky that he was not seriously injured in that type of a fall, you know. And it's a disgrace that, you know, these things aren't seen to before a fight. It's the responsibility to make sure that the ring is secure. And I'm one of those guys that believe that there should be a table around all 4 sides of the ring, so that there isn't that drop in the event that a fighter does get knocked out, does get knocked through the ropes, that he'll land on the table and not 3 feet down. And that just scared the hell out of me. I remember when that happened, you know, like the way he went crashing through the ropes. And when we watched the replay of it, you could see it wasn't because he did anything wrong. You know, it was a little aggression from Smith, but basically when Hopkins tried to dip down to neutralize the attack, his ass just gave way. Like it was as if he sat down on something that wasn't there. It was as if somebody pulled the chair out. You know, when they pull the chair out when someone's going to sit down. And that's exactly what happened. It was scary that happened. And, you know, I think those kind of things are unforgivable in this day and age, that you can't tighten 4 turnbuckles to make sure the ropes are tight.
so you think it's the commission's responsibility to check the ropes before the event starts, or is it the promoter's responsibility?
Well, it's the promoter's responsibility to have the ring installed, but it's the commission's responsibility to make sure that it's installed properly and it's safe and secure. Test the ropes, check them out, everything is good, nice and tight. It is definitely the commission's responsibility to make sure that's taken care of, because, you know, it's bad enough you're going into a sport where, you know, you're punching each other in the head for a living. The least you can do is have it done where you don't have to worry about going to the ropes and falling 3 feet down onto your neck.
Yeah, 100%. And for Smith this weekend now, he has the challenge in Vlasov. And Vlasov is not necessarily that well known and lower in the ranks, but presents some challenges as well. And one of his victories was against Isaac Chilemba, a fighter you've worked with in the past. I don't believe you were in that corner, though, for his loss against Vlasov. Do you know anything of Vlasov or that type of fight against Joe Smith that you have an idea of where this is headed, or are you going to be generally curious to see when the first bell rings what type of fight we're getting this Saturday night?
I think it's going to be a case of what Vlasov is going to be able to do should Joe Smith, which I expect he will, be able to stand up to the respectful punches that Vlasov's going to try to land to keep him honest. And when he sees he can't, or when he sees that his punches, he hits him with his Sunday best, and Joe Smith keeps coming and keeps putting the pressure on, it's going to be interesting to see how Vlasov reacts to that. I think that's what makes the matchup so intriguing. Joe Smith is so big. He's so strong. He's crude. His somewhat unorthodox approach makes him effective, makes him difficult to predict. So if Vlasov is expecting the general nice moves from a fighter that he would be accustomed to from a high level type guy, that you know what you're going to, you kind of know what you're going to get. He's going to get hit with shots, and there's going to be shots coming at him where he's never expecting punches to be coming at him at that time. That's what makes Smith so good and so dangerous. So, you know, Vlasov is a good fighter, like you said, beat Chilemba, but I think this is going to be a heck of a fight. And you always wonder what Joe Smith can do. Every time you think, this guy will beat him, he pulls up a surprise and he's able to neutralize all those great qualities that an opponent might have. And then he turns around and it makes it work for himself. So I'm really interested in this fight. And I know that there's a lot of people, promoters included, who are banking a lot on Joe Smith.
Right. He's the favorite going in. And the fight that a lot of people are already salivating, thinking about, is the Arthur Beterbiev unification fight and try to get the WBO title from the winner, especially if it's Joe Smith. Now, if it's Vlasov, it also has appeal definitely in Eastern Europe, with both fighters being of Russian descent. But if Joe Smith is the guy for Beterbiev next, do you think that makes the most sense, or would you rather Arthur, wait for a guy like Dimitri Bivol, or maybe even the mega fight against Canelo, which might be more difficult? But where does Beterbiev, Joe Smith rank in your head if that fight happens and Smith is victorious Saturday?
Matt, the reason I'm a little reluctant to answer that question is because I'm not sure what the financial implications are. As soon as you mentioned Canelo, I'm saying, Joe who? What? There's Canelo, right? I mean, that's obviously the fight you want to make, because that's the cash cow in boxing. So of course you want to fight Canelo. Dimitri Bivol, absolutely. He's got a belt that I think Arthur wants. And so from a point of view of the belt and what he could bring, I definitely think that the Bivol fight is far more important. And then it comes down to finances. Which one is going to be the biggest payoff? We talked about Canelo, of course, but I would think that Bivol is the fight, being a Russian, but being a Russian world champion, is massive. So can you imagine two Russian world champions facing off against each other? Both have belts, fighting perhaps in Moscow. I mean, that's massive, so I would be hard pressed to imagine that a Joe Smith fight, it's not impossible though, that a Joe Smith fight would be more attractive to Beterbiev than a Bivol fight. But that's not to say that the Bivol fight would happen. Now, Joe Smith fight likely will happen because they're both promoted by Top Rank. So they're both house fighters. They could fight each other. The match is easy to make. Getting Bivol into the ring, when you're dealing with another promotion, he's promoted by Main Events, etc., that's going to be a little bit more difficult to do. So, of course, from us our boxing fan perspective, you say, yeah, Bivol, 2 titles on the line, 3 titles on the line, that's great. But it's not always going to be easy to make.
No, that's for sure. And we'll look forward to seeing the result. And Arthur is in a position now where he can choose a little bit more. But he also, what I like about Arthur is he wants the belts. He wants to try to unify the division, and he's not going to shy away from anyone. So regardless of who his next opponent is, you can rest assured it's going to be someone significant in a big time fight, especially considering Arthur at the age he is. He doesn't want to continue for another 10 years. He knows he has to try to get, of course, the bigger career fights he can while he's still in the best shape he is and undefeated.
Of course. But you know what? Again, even if it is Arthur Beterbiev that Joe Smith fights, again, you don't go into that fight thinking, well, this is a walk in the park. You look at Joe Smith and you figure, well, there ain't much there. He's not super fast. He's a big guy, punches hard, but he's a little bit slow. Okay, he should be able to handle it. There's something about him. There's something about the way he's built. There's something about the way he makes that awkwardness work for him. And he's driven by something that you can't see in looking at his record. You can't see by watching him shadow box. You can't see by watching him, spar or hit the heavy bag. There's something within that drives this guy to do things that makes it the toughest night of your life. And that's a hard fight. And that's why I said the same thing about Callum Johnson, same kind of guy.
Yeah, he's a throwback in the sense that he's also has a full-time job in construction for the most part. Joe Smith doesn't only have a career in training and fighting. Usually that adds an element of toughness we've noticed in the past.
Matthew, he has destroyed the myth of having to be full-time devoted to boxing. Oh no, I can't work. I can't do anything else. I got to train. I got to do that. No, you're talking about a guy who goes to the gym after work and trains the way it always used to be done. He's gifted in that he's got a good build and a strong body. He's not a weightlifting freak. He doesn't go and do all kinds of crazy stuff. He does his boxing. And he's on the verge of fighting for a world title. He's among the best light heavyweights in the world. He's destroyed that myth that you have to train 5 times a day and lift weights and do all kinds of stuff to be among the elite. Here's a guy who doesn't have those God-given talents that I spoke of, and is among the best in the world. There you go.
Okay, there you go, indeed. And there's other fights this weekend. One of them, or few of them, in London, England, of course, probably one of the most popular spots for boxing in the last few years. And you wanted to address some of these women title fights that we're going to be seeing on the undercard of Conor Benn, a top UK prospect, aspiring contender against the veteran Sammy Vargas, who gave Amir Khan trouble in a fight that was supposed to be a stay easy fight for Amir Khan. And we've known Sammy Vargas from a Canadian fighter be involved in so many wars, and he's always a tough out. That, you know what, that's another fight that if Conor Benn has any weaknesses, Sammy Vargas will exploit them and will make it a very difficult fight for him. I don't know if you want to just say a quick word on that, but also Savannah Marshall defends her title in the middleweight division, and we have Ebanie Bridges fighting for a vacant title against Courtenay, Shannon, Courtenay, pardon.
Shannon Courtenay.
Yeah, in the bantamweight division.
Yeah, listen, Conor Benn, son of British legend Nigel Benn, you know, trying to fulfill the big shoes that's been left for him by his father. Amir Khan warned Conor Benn about how difficult Sammy Vargas can be. And Sammy usually always comes prepared. Another guy, it's ironic, the two guys on this that we're talking about, both a little bit awkward in what they do, and they can make it a nightmare for skilled guys. Sammy Vargas is one of those guys as well. A lot of grit, good chin, takes it, comes to fight. You know, he's not scared of anybody. He'll come and scrap it out. So if Conor Benn is not ready and Conor Benn thinks that he's getting an easy fight here, you know, he could be mistaken. I hope the layoff hasn't hurt Sammy. You know, time is a massive killer to everybody. Having celebrated a recent birthday, I can attest to that. But you know, aging is not good, and inactivity is not good. So I hope this is something that hasn't hurt Sammy Vargas. But if it's the Sammy Vargas that we've come to know and love and know how he can fight, then, you know, I think this is going to, again, could be a great fight. And there's probably a reason why Matchroom has put it on as the main event.
Savannah Marshall in the middleweight division, she's the other fighter that's mentioned as a possible opponent for Claressa Shields. And Savannah Marshall had success against Claressa Shields way back in the amateur days. And that's one possible mega woman fight that could happen if it were to happen in stateside, or even probably even more so in the UK if they can get fans there in the stands. I really think that's appealing. And for people who don't know as much, when you look at some of the top female fighters to follow, if you're getting into that a little bit more recently in the last few years, they're getting more exposure, more important spots on the undercards. Savannah Marshall is probably right up there as one of the best female fighters pound for pound right now.
Yeah, and one that's really emerged as a fighter, you know, one that has gone through the amateur ranks, has fought the best in the world as an amateur, had a ton of amateur fights before going on to her pro career, you know, a real grinder in the way that she came through boxing, didn't just appear and decided to turn pro, you know, did an extensive amateur career. I got a lot of respect and a lot of time for her, you know, and I think that ultimate matchup is coming between Savannah and Claressa Shields. So I think this could be very, very interesting. So she had unfortunately, her original opponent, who was very awkward, very dangerous, had to pull out because of a positive COVID test either within her camp or herself. So pulled out, and they were lucky enough to be able to find a replacement for Savannah on this card. So she is on the card fighting another good fighter. Correct, from Sweden. So I saw a little film on her. So this will be interesting. And she's going to deal also with the awkward, boy, it seems like I'm using this word a lot today, the awkward style of a Claressa Shields as well. And if you've seen Claressa fight, she does things she's very relaxed in the ring. She moves left, she moves right, back, forward. She has long range. She's tall, punches good. You know, I think she has 7 knockouts and 9 wins. So yeah, she's a good fighter. She's trained by Peter Fury. She's very dedicated. She trains a lot with Huey Fury as well. So she understands training in that, you know, in a male dominated gym, you know, where they're not there to play. They're there to work, you know, and they do things, they train together, and she's just like one of the guys, and let's go, we're going to work. And she does. And she's emerged as a really top flight and maybe one of the best fighters on the women's scene right now.
As far as the vacant WBA bantamweight title fight for Ebanie Bridges against, like I said before, Shannon Courtenay, I have to make sure I pronounce that last name correctly. What can you tell us about that matchup on paper, and for those who don't necessarily know that the two fighters as well?
Ebanie, she really is an interesting character. I mean, she went from being, you know, a bodybuilder, a competitive bodybuilder, to a ring girl. I'm not sure if I have that in the correct order. Bodybuilder, ring girl. She's a math teacher and decided she wanted to turn pro and become a pro fighter. And she really understood, contrary, in a contrast, I should say, to Savannah, who went through the arduous amateur ranks, and Team GB and the whole bit. Ebanie found a way to take advantage of social media, to take advantage of her intelligence, her opinions, her presence, if you will, on social media, and make a name for herself to the point where they wanted her in the UK. She's from Australia. She's only had, I believe, 4 or 5 pro fights, and she's built a fan base. I mean, I watch her Instagram. She'll put up something, and there'll be like, 300 comments on a post that she'll put up that people want to talk to her and tell her, how wonderful, and she feeds on that. And that's her driving spirit. When you talked about who's your Bundini, well, she has her own Bundini in being able, the fans that she interacts with and the lives that she does. She's very active on social media. She has talked herself, and she can fight. She can fight. She hasn't fought enough for people to realize it, but she can fight. I've watched her. I've seen her work in the gym. Her technique is good. She has a sound base. She knows what she's doing in terms of punching, but she has basically moved herself into a world title fight after only, I think, like I said, 4 or 5 fights. She's moved herself into a world title fight. So it's going to be interesting, and I think they both have good chances.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also another fight on Showtime, Boots Ennis against Sergey Lipinets. It's another test, again, of a prospect, Boots, who's emerging as a contender against a tough fighter like Sergey Lipinets, who in his fight against Casio Clayton from Canada, many could argue that he probably lost that one, ended up being a draw, but it was a controversial decision. And I think it will be interesting, though. Lipinets, if he has still that presence in him in the welterweight of being a tough fighter with solid technique but a good punch, Boots Ennis, it's really a step up. But a lot of people are excited about Boots Curtis Ennis, to be possibly one of the top up and coming welterweights, and another exciting name to add to boxing.
It's a step up for sure. So if he loses, like we always say, at some point, every pro fighter at some point hits the wall. And sometimes it happens when you hit 6 rounders or 8 rounders or 10 rounders or contenders, or at some point you hit the wall. So if he doesn't hit the wall against Lipinets, then there's no looking back, and it's only looking forward, of moving himself into contention to fight for a world title.
And just before here, because it's coming to me now, when you were talking about the women fighting in boxing and they're building their fan base and they're really getting, it seems like a momentum push here, well deserved. But in a sense, didn't they kind of, when the MMA image, though, the UFC, they deserve credit in that part where they really found a way to market female fighting and combat sports for the female fighters that I think boxing is trying to emulate in that style, when they think about the Ronda Rouseys of the world and all the marketing and the popularity that they knew they could go and get. I don't know if you agree or not, but because boxing for a longest time, women's boxing was nowhere near the attention level it's getting than it has in the last few years. And that was after the progress that the UFC had done, I believe, in building their female fighters.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure that I agree with that. I have no facts to prove this, but
is it just because you don't want to agree with anything that the boxing world could have possibly taken a page out of something that's in the MMA world?
No, I'm because it takes a lot from the MMA world, including trying to monopolize itself. But no, I'm thinking more because women in MMA were allowed to flourish quicker because of so many different aspects of what's involved in MMA. And there's certainly, I know this is going to sound somewhat, people are going to take offense to this somehow, but there is something that's going to be attractive to a male audience and to people who buy tickets of watching women wrestle and groundwork and punch, each other, with so many aspects of the sport involved. The body contact between 2 women that you will see in an MMA fight, I think, allowed it to grow, right? And I think that's a big difference from when you shave everything off. When you shave everything off to only boxing. Now there has to be that refinement, that comparison, not to MMA, but to its male counterpart. And I think the one thing that needs to change in women's boxing is we have to get out of these 2-minute rounds. That we have to end that 2-minute round stuff, because it's favoring the weaker fighters who are able to stay in there longer. It's not allowing the better fighters to get the job done and finish these guys up when you're bringing them to the point of exhaustion, and then they're allowed a minute's rest and get their rest time. I think that has to change. And when it does, and you can get the knockout wins, or in the case of MMA, like you said, the submission wins, or even the knockout wins that women were getting by beating somebody in MMA, I think we need to see that in boxing. So
Right.
I don't know why there has to be the 2-minute rounds. I mean, I don't know what medically, I don't know what the reason is.
2-minute rounds and 10 rounds for championship fights. So what you're saying is that it's 20 minutes of in-ring action versus 36 for a championship fight on the mill. That 16 minutes of in-ring action is huge in my mind. Like, it would be a game changer.
Well, the easiest way I look at it is not in the number of rounds. It's the ratio of rest time to work time. I think I've told you this before. So right now you're getting 1 minute's rest for every 2 minutes of work. That's 50%. So 50% over a 10-round fight is a lot. It's a lot of rest time that you're able to recuperate and recover from. When you're doing 3-minute rounds, consecutive minutes, and only 1 minute rest, you're down to now 33% of rest time to work ratio. That's massive, especially forget 12, over 10 rounds, it's even a lot. So I think where we're seeing fighters who are dominating their opponents, and just when they're getting them, that extra minute starts to add up immensely, round after round after round. Oh, you might say, the first round, she'd have got out of that round, even though it would have been a 3-minute round, she'd have got out of it. Yeah, okay, she might have. Or she'd have got out of the second round. You know what? Starting come round 3, round 4, round 7, round 8, that extra minute is an eternity. It's an eternity. And you can ask any fighter that's been there, that last minute is an eternity. And I think that could be the saving grace for the great women fighters that will eventually emerge, Matthew. Like, it's in its infancy. It's going to emerge. Don't compare it to the men, because you can't. You're not going to be able to compare it to the men. But just because a woman doesn't run 100 meters as fast as a man, it's still exciting to watch a 100-meter final at the Olympics for the women. It's still done at a very high level. So once those women start to emerge, amateur programs where more women are competing and better fighters start coming out, 3 minutes, bro. We need 3-minute rounds.
Yeah, I know.
Separate the girls from the women.
Yeah, and it should be done already. We'll see if that's going to be some sort of change that we can anticipate within the next year, or is it going to be, like you think, maybe a longer term deal for that change to take place. And before we conclude this evening, and we talk a lot about the fights this upcoming Saturday, but we got to finish off on Carl Frampton, the Jackal, and his TKO defeat suffered at the hands of Jamel Herring, who not only proved that I think he's a world-class fighter, I think in a lot of ways he proved that he may be able to compete with any of the elite fighters at 130 with this performance. But he took care of business against a Carl Frampton who suffered his first knockout loss of his career, and wisely chooses to end his career, I believe, because when he looks back at this fight, there's not much you can say, you know what, I can get back to that level. I think it was a very great career in the case of Carl Frampton, but retires at the right time after this knockout loss to Jamel Herring. Your thoughts, Russ, on Carl Frampton's career and the defeat Saturday?
Great guy. I've had the privilege of spending time with him and talking to him, and he's just wonderful to talk to. And he was really trying to become Ireland's first 3-weight champion. When it still means something to be a 3-weight champion. And he said after the fight that he had already made his mind up that win, lose, or draw, he was going to retire. I think he knew that he just wasn't the Jackal of before. It just wasn't the same. And to take on somebody, especially with that size difference of Jamal Herring, I think was a massive ask. And, everyone, his fans hope for the victory because he's worked so hard at the sport to become a 2-time champion. And, he's just such a good guy that deserved it. And, Jamal Herring just works and trains, and I think made Timothy Bradley eat a little crow, for what he had said, in Jamal's last fight, where he said, it wasn't inspired, he was looking to quit, like he really didn't treat him very kindly on the telecast. A guy who's a former Marine who has always conducted himself with a lot of class, and he did again, with Frampton after this fight. So I think he made Tim eat a little crow on that one, and proved what a world-class fighter he is. And you're not always going to have an A night. Every now and then you have an off night, and fighters that are on air, I think, have a role to protect the fighters that are in the ring, because they've been there. And don't become what the regular keyboard warrior would be, saying, look terrible, look at garbage, he was ready to quit, he's no good, all the negative stuff that comes out from people who haven't been there. I think the former fighters that are on the telecast have a responsibility to protect the fighters and not be critics of them, especially to question their heart and their courage and their determination, because for everybody who steps into the ring, you have to respect that, especially as a former fighter.
I agree what you're saying, Russ, but to the argument of those who would say, if there is to be somebody who can question some, those perspectives of being a former fighter or former fighters themselves in ringside, right? If you're going to have more of a leg to stand on to be more negative or to criticize certain fighters, it's probably easier to do so coming from in-ring experience than somebody who's from the outside world who has never been actually in a professional fight to do that same criticism.
100%. But I don't think a former fighter, I don't know how many fights you can count on one hand where a former fighter would be justified in criticizing a fighter's will and his heart. Sometimes the people who don't know, they'll question it. But a fighter should never question that, because the fact that they're there, having done the career that they've done, you don't get to where Jamal Herring was in his last fight. Let's not talk about not the Frampton fight, the fight where you don't get all that way because you didn't have heart. So you could have had a bad night, and I think the fighters are supposed to realize that they should not be the one. To me, they're the guys there to protect you. There's going to be enough naysayers out there, but I don't think the fighters should. I think the fighter commentators should be the one to protect the guys that are in the ring. That's me.
Fair enough. Can't disagree with you there. Mr. Anber, it's been another lovely evening. Any final thoughts as we go, as we say goodbye here? And we're going to be reconvening next week, and hopefully with some other developments as far as audio versions of the podcast available on different platforms. But Mr. Anber, I give you the final word this evening.
The final word is, I wish people would take as an example the conduct and class in what we saw in the ring last week with Jamal Herring and Carl Frampton. And I think this is what the sport needs. Okay, you didn't have anybody slapping anybody around. You didn't have any pushing and shoving and trash talking and all that stuff, which seemed to gets everybody so excited. But then the fight turns out to be a dud. You had two guys who conducted themselves with class, knowing fully well that they have families, they have people who care for them, who love them. They're doing a dangerous sport in boxing. They didn't trash talk, but when they got in the ring, they delivered everything they had. Carl Frampton even trying to find a glimpse of his former past to be able to do something against Herring after being down in the first round, dug deep to try to find that. And that's what we should be embracing. That's what we should be honoring. It's not what goes on at the weigh-in and the press conferences. It's what goes on in the ring. And what went on in the ring is what's most important. And they both delivered and conducted themselves with class. I think that's what the sport needs more of.
I agree 100%. This is another edition of Calling Russ Anber. Mr. Anber, good evening. And
my brother, thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you, everybody.